Hello and welcome. I'm Adrienne Arsht, Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center and the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Good morning to our guests from the West Coast. Good afternoon to those joining us from Washington, D.C. to Chile. Housekeeping. For those on Zoom, there is an interpretation into English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and closed captioning. Since September of last year, in partnership with the U.S. Department of State, the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center has led a regional campaign to generate greater momentum and inclusivity on the road to the Summit of the Americas. The goal of these public discussions is to generate consensus on hemispheric priorities, amplify diverse perspectives, and produce tangible recommendations so that the summit in June is both productive and inclusive. Today, I am here to open this discussion since it's a topic of great personal interest, creating green, as I am, and equitable growth. Raising awareness of climate change and building resilience to its effects is one of the most urgent situations that we face. When I lived in Miami, I saw firsthand the impacts of climate and the need for creating a greener pathway for our country, our hemisphere, and the world. LA exemplifies how to take action to begin to address urgent issues. In LA's case, through its work on green and equitable growth. Just last month, the city celebrated the launch of the largest renewable energy project in our country's history. The 9th Summit of the Americas now presents an opportunity to create solutions for inclusive economic development for the entire region, as the hemisphere possesses the natural resources to lead the world in sustainable and innovative growth. Over 58% of the world's lithium supply is found in Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. The second largest hydropower dam is found on the border of Brazil and Paraguay. And the Caribbean marine resources provide vast opportunities for offshore wind and solar energy. Not only that, but the region also has the human talent, innovation, and creativity to imagine new methods of development and energy production that will lead to a more resilient planet and people. To kick us off, Jason Marzak, the Senior Director of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, will lead a keynote conversation with Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, the official host city of the summit in June. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adrienne. At our last Summit of the Americas event in partnership with the State Department, it had only just been announced that Los Angeles would be the host city of the summit. Now I'm delighted to welcome to the Atlantic Council in our Road to the Summit series, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. Mayor Garcetti, congratulations again on the successful bid to host this important summit. As our viewers likely know, you've been mayor of Los Angeles for 9 years, and during your tenure, you've taken important steps to expand public transportation, strengthen higher education, and unite cities across the world in combating climate change. In the next few minutes, we'll discuss Los Angeles' unique approach to subnational engagement and green inclusive job growth, as well as Mayor Garcetti's broader vision of his hemispheric collaboration. Now, Mayor, among the many reasons why Los Angeles was chosen as a host city is its vibrant Latino communities and strong international connection. What do you hope to achieve for Los Angeles as the host city for the Summit of the Americas?
Well, thank you, Jason, and great to be with you. And thank you to you and Adrienne. Thanks to Marianne Walker for helping put this all together. And what an honor it is to be on this road together. I couldn't be more excited to have found in the Federal Register with 2 days notice before the deadline that the White House was soliciting bids to host this, and LA jumped into action and did what we do best, which is to show off a city of kind of creativity, of freedom, and of belonging. A city that I think we'd have to build if it didn't exist, but that I describe as the Western capital of the United States, the Northern capital of Latin America, and the Eastern capital of the Pacific Rim. This kind of intersection of culture, of vibrancy, of economy and commerce. And we hope to be able to showcase really what are the core values of our United States of America and its future as embodied in America's second biggest city. I mean, LA is the third largest metropolitan economy in the world now, basically tied with New York and only second to Tokyo. And when you look at having the third busiest airport, the busiest port in the hemisphere, when you look at the entertainment industry and aerospace, when you look at the just swirl of cultures where we can lay claim to being the second biggest city of people of national descent throughout the Americas, from Mexico to El Salvador to Belize and down into South America, we really want to showcase that we are the Americas in Los Angeles. So it's about bringing the Americas to LA, and it's about then sending LA to the rest of the Americas, and in doing so promote an American vision of inclusion, belonging, and creativity.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, how is the planning going thus far?
It's going great. Luckily, this isn't about muscle memory. This is our daily workout, whether it's, the Oscars, the Super Bowl this year, the Olympics that are coming. LA loves to stage and host big events. So we've got the venues, we've got the weather, we've got the topography, we've got these amazing places that people can go and see something they've never seen before, or find something that's very familiar. I always say you can be a fourth generation Angelino like myself. I'm the great grandson and grandson of immigrants from Mexico, Eastern Europe. But I can find something around a corner I've never seen before, or someone can step off a plane from Paraguay or from Costa Rica or from Canada and find the people, the language, the culture that they're familiar with embedded already in our city. So it's always something familiar, something new, and our planning is going great with the State Department, with the White House. We're very excited to really have the first ever LA hosting of global heads of state. These events have often been sometimes in places like Seattle, Chicago, New York, Boston, Washington, but never before in LA. So we're going to make our first one really count and hopefully show that off in preparation for us looking at 2028 and hosting the world for the Olympics.
Well, that sounds really exciting, Mayor. I know you mentioned the good weather. I know emerging from the winter here in Washington, people are excited about the good weather. Now, you've been a longtime advocate for greater subnational ties between the U.S. and the world. And this includes leadership of the C40 and also establishment of the country's first deputy mayor for international relations. What advice do you have for mayors and governors across the hemisphere, whether those who may want to build stronger bilateral relations, but also maybe those who don't know where to begin or hesitate about broader international engagement? What specifically can other leaders learn from this particularly strong relationship, for example, that LA has with Mexico City? How do you see the future of cities working together on an international front, and those lessons from Los Angeles?
It's such a great question and such an interesting part, I think, of the evolution of global relations right now. I used to be a professor of international relations, and when I started to run for city council, people said, "What's a professor of IR doing running for city council?" And I said, "Have you seen LA lately? It is international relations." I represented a district that had Little Armenia and Thai Town, and I lived in Thailand and worked in Burma. I had, been an exchange student in Japan. I had lived in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and so I kind of always felt at home in those places because they reminded me of LA and vice versa. That subnational level of diplomacy, I think, is the richest, most undertapped level of human action in the world today. Not only have I been blessed with an amazing person, Ambassador Nina Hachigian, first deputy mayor of international relations in LA, and the only one in the United States with that title, I believe. But we've seen across the world that when we engage with each other, the toughest challenges that cross borders, from immigration and gender equity, of course, climate change and this pandemic, we have a better shot of addressing those if we just don't wait only for national governments to solve it. I'll give you a case in point. As chair of C40, which is the 97 kind of biggest cities of the world, I hit the bat signal at the beginning of the pandemic. And when Zoom was still something new, this is probably our 10,000th Zoom, right? But when it was like my first or second, we had almost 45 mayors from around the world, from Seoul, from Milan, from London, from Mexico City, from all these cities together across our time zones get together and talk about this pandemic. The mayor of Seoul talked about what it was like to have drive-through testing. Nobody knew what that meant. The mayor of Milan, when that was the hotspot, told us how to get ready for your hospitals to be able to subdivide their space to deal with the suffering that would come and to prevent as many deaths as possible. And the next day we were implementing those things. I talked with my successor at C40, recently took over, Sadiq Khan, and he was briefing his Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and telling them all the things that were going on in different cities. And Boris Johnson turned to his aides and said, do we know this stuff? And they said, yeah, but we've been writing a report, we're gonna get it to you. And I think it was that moment of realizing that when we wait for national leaders, the whole bureaucracy has to get it up to them. You have to schedule weeks of them talking to each other, negotiations of months of forward action. Mayors the next day are moving on things. And so to me, this is why it's so important for us to invest as a nation in this area. And whether it's that or our gender equity network that we co-founded or Mayor's Migration Council, these are the places where we can be the laboratories and the frictionless implementers of the change we need.
Exactly as you're saying, Mayor Garcetti, and your colleagues know around the country and around the world, mayors like yourself, they have to get things done. There isn't much time for talk. You have to deliver, and mayors and cities can really be incubators of really best practices. One way in which LA is an incubator is being a leader in green and equitable economic growth, which is the topic of our discussion today. And less than a month ago, as Adrian mentioned, you celebrated the launch of the largest renewable energy project in our country's history, a project with the state of New Mexico. How will this project lead to inclusive job growth in the LA area?
Well, we've led the nation out of the last recession and now out of the pandemic recession with more job growth than any city in America, a higher number of jobs and a higher percentage of jobs. We're number one, according to Bloomberg Business Week. And I really think part of that is that we've invested in the idea of where the new economy is going to move towards. Specifically, one of the main areas has been around so-called green jobs, which is a very fuzzy term that everybody uses and few define. For us, it's very clear. It's clean energy jobs, it's water resilience jobs, it's clean transportation and buildings. We have the 5 zeros in our Green New Deal in Los Angeles, which is zero emissions vehicles, zero carbon buildings, zero carbon electricity, zero waste and zero wasted water. And when we look at that, whether it's a drought and forest fires, whether it's in other places, floods, there's a lot of work that we have to do, immense work for our infrastructure. Passing the largest public transportation measure in American history at the local level ×2, we have a permanent tax that's going to generate $120 billion in the next 40 years to build 15 rapid transit lines or extend them. That's never happened in American history. That might sound great, but you know what? Everywhere in America needs to do that. That wind farm in New Mexico, which is the largest in hemispheric history, maybe outside of China, the largest in world history. We need to do that over and over and over again if we're going to meet our goals, like in Los Angeles, to be 97% carbon free by the end of this decade. I started, and our Department of Water and Power had 2% renewable energy. Yeah. Today, that's well past half carbon free energy. So to me, there's jobs in them there hills. And I say to any mayor or governor, if you're not investing in this, regardless of your politics or your science, and the science is clear, you're losing jobs.
Yeah. It's a really good point. And how should governments more broadly be rethinking or reimagining economic opportunity based on some of the lessons from Los Angeles as climate change impacts cities even more greatly in the years ahead?
Well, I've said America is addicted to poverty. Unfortunately, that poverty addiction costs us billions of dollars a year and trillions of dollars in productivity. It is our greatest, I think, challenge in America. It manifests in homelessness and housing woes, in unequal environmental conditions for people who live in those frontline communities where there's still oil wells in places like LA, in people's backyards, or the emissions from dirty trucks and other things that are in their backyards. So whether it's greening our port, which is reduced its pollution by 90% in terms of our SOx, NOx emission, by 60%, our particulate matter by over 50%. These are real things where we're actually making sure as we build jobs, they don't come at the expense of communities. And I would say it really corresponds with poverty. And so economic opportunity, local hire, for instance, in the construction work, where we're doing the airport $20 billion program, over a third of those workers, or close to a third, excuse me, of those workers come from the local community. That takes hard work, but don't wait for pipelines to produce it, build them. And then you'll see that the environmental work we do isn't just about wealthy people with top of the line Teslas. It's about frontline communities having better health opportunities right now today.
Mayor, let me go back to the summit. It's an opportunity to hopefully strengthen regional integration beyond just the first week of June. And this is a vision shared by the US government as well. What role, we spoke earlier about the role that you see for Los Angeles as the host of the summit, but what role do you see for Los Angeles and the hemispheric relationship in the months and years following the summit, building on this convening that we'll have in June?
Well, the nice thing is this is America's chairmanship for the year. So while we'll have the summit, we really have 11 more months as well to program culture, innovation, economy, ecology. And we plan in Los Angeles to welcome the world to continue that conversation across the Americas, to look at Gustavo Dudamel, who comes from Venezuela, and is the musical director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, to look at the work that we're doing at our museums, but also to push ideas that we got from Latin America, like El Sistema that created Gustavo Dudamel to bring orchestral playing to the poorest kids in his country, which has been emulated in Mexico and other places. That's just one example with culture. But we really think that Los Angeles is already this leadership place, this catalyst for these conversations. And we take very seriously that we're not just hosting heads of state for this very important summit for the days they'll be here. It's really for this entire year to push an America's identity. You know, what is the identity of the Americas? What values do we hold together? In a world that's more autocratic now than democratic, how can we push democratic values, liberal society, belonging, fairer economy, a fight against the climate change we see around us? So to me, if the Americas can define that, we can lead the world and inspire them to live by those values and to implement that change that we so badly need. So I hope everybody's as excited as we are, not just to host, but to take that entire year to inspire, reconvene, and recatalyze action as well.
You know, Mayor, and I couldn't agree more. And I know this is a topic so dear to Adrian as well as culture and the arts and bringing people together through culture and the arts. And I recently saw that the Los Angeles Opera was recently named a Colombian, Lina Gonzalez Granados, as the first Latina to conduct have a major conducting post in a major U.S. opera company. So that
very exciting. We're going to have Colombia and Venezuela right next to each other across the street with our Philharmonic and opera, just as they are in South America as rivals too.
Well, Mayor Garcetti, thank you very much for joining us for these incredibly timely insights. We look forward to working with you and the city of Los Angeles further on the road to the summit in June. I'd now like to welcome Marianne Walker, who is managing partner at WH Legal Group and a member of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center Advisory Council, who will kick off our first panel focused on equitable economic growth in the Americas. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your thoughtful words, Mayor Garcetti. You always make me feel so proud to be a Los Angelino. And thank you, Jason, for your kind introduction and the work you and the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center are doing for these important series, The Road to the Summit of the Americas. I'm thrilled at the work that Mayor Garcetti and his team did to get the Summit of the Americas here in Los Angeles this June. We're the second city with the second largest population of Mexicans in the world, only second to Mexico City. Mexicans and Mexican Americans represent almost 40% of our great state of California and certainly contribute to the thriving culture and economy here. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Ángela María Zuluaga, Senior Vice President for Public Affairs, Communication, and Sustainability at the Coca-Cola Company. Maria Tuyuk, President of Global Network of Indigenous Entrepreneurs of Guatemala. And Tony Ann Broadber, Representative at UN Women's Multi-Country Caribbean Office. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean's annual report released January this year predicts that in 2022, the region will only grow 1/3 of what it grew in 2021 and will slow more than the rest of the world. That is to say, it will decelerate to 2.1%, while advanced economies are predicted to grow by 4.2%, and emerging economies will grow by 4.1%. Major factors include low regional investment, low generation of job, and uneven growth across and within countries. Tony, how can we support underrepresented entrepreneurs through targeted investments? What lessons have you learned through the rollout of the Caribbean Basin Gender Equality Fund? And what is the value of incorporating gender lens investing across the region?
Thanks so much for that question, Marianne. I think the first thing that we've learned is it's really critical to know where the women are, know where people are in your economy. Right now, we know that 59% of the people in businesses that are unbanked, that are informal, are women, and they're women-owned businesses. So when you know where they are, then you're in a better position to create the kind of financial products that they need. And that's where gender lens investing comes in. I think the other lesson is you need to know your partners. It's SDG 17, partnerships for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and public-private partnerships for the goals. And we've been able to collaborate with one private equity firm, Portland Private Equity, on this particular initiative, which is on its way of being rolled out. We've been able to learn from collaboration across different development banks that led to the creation of the 2X Collaborative that centers gender lens investing. So where the women are, making sure that the products you develop actually reach those women. And then the other lesson learned is don't reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of really good programs out there. How can we build on those programs, make those programs more targeted to those unbanked women, to the women who may not be speaking the kind of language that our financial institutions are speaking? And then I think the last lesson is really to make sure that we are also doing the work of handholding. A lot of women are saying, not only do we need the financing, but we also need the support through the business ecosystem, through the financial ecosystem. So we network, we know how best to get our products from the Caribbean to Latin America to the United States. And so those are things that we've been able to learn. And I think that is why this particular collaboration with Portland has been labeled a flagship fund for the 2X Collaborative. And there are only 5 worldwide, and 1 is in Latin America and the Caribbean. So that's critical. So as Mayor Garcetti was saying, the growth may be small, but there are jobs in these hills. How can we make sure that women are a part of creating the employment as well as accessing the opportunities for employment?
Thank you very much, Tony. María, reconocemos que las mujeres indígenas enfrentan muchas barreras para participar en la economía formal, ya que solo 1 de cada 10 mujeres hace trabajo remunerado. ¿Cómo pueden coaliciones como la Red Global de Empresas Indígenas empoderar a los trabajadores marginados? ¿Y qué recursos son necesarios para emplear enfoques similares?
Muchas gracias, un saludo para cada uno hoy ante la energía del Ajauaj que desde nuestra cosmovisión representa el cañaveral y camino a la plenitud de vida. Quisiera desde Guatemala enviarles un cordial saludo. Y quizás para responder la pregunta, primero nosotros como Red de Empresarios Indígenas somos una organización que promueve el desarrollo económico inclusivo para que los indígenas sean económicamente independientes y parte integral de la economía de los países. Y consideramos que hay aspectos que son muy importantes y que también forman parte de nuestro accionar como red, entre ellas el fortalecimiento de capacidades empresariales, en este caso de las mujeres, porque la mayoría ya hacen un trabajo o tienen una experiencia técnica, pero nos hace falta el conocimiento global del idioma, como ya lo mencionaba Tony, en relación a los negocios. También es importante el desarrollo comercial, es decir, cómo fortalecemos las empresas y al mismo tiempo su capacidad de generar esos productos y servicios que satisfagan las necesidades. Y por supuesto es necesario generar un entorno favorable para que ese emprendimiento pueda tener éxito, y allí es la relación con las políticas y planes. Nos parece importante también romper paradigmas y sobre todo pensar que las mujeres indígenas en este caso no solamente somos mano de obra o somos trabajadores, sino también podemos ser dueños de negocios a través de la generación de oportunidades, de convertirnos en socios del desarrollo de las empresas, de los estados, impactar positivamente en la vida de las mujeres, de los jóvenes, de las comunidades y sobre todo apoyar los procesos de desarrollo. Cuando nosotros hablamos de desarrollo es un proceso, no son actividades aisladas que tenemos que hacer, sino tenemos que buscar una meta común para impactar de manera positiva y sobre todo establecer alianzas incluso trascendiendo fronteras. Hoy la virtualidad nos permite poder trascender fronteras en los negocios y parte de eso es lo que nosotros hacemos como parte de la Red Mundial de Empresas y Negocios Indígenas. Buscamos relaciones con Estado, con sector privado, con diferentes entidades, porque sabemos que solos no podemos solucionar la situación y necesitamos de la articulación de esfuerzos entre todos.
Muchas gracias, María, y muy de acuerdo contigo. Ángela, ¿cuál es el papel de las pequeñas y medianas empresas en el impulso de la recuperación económica y la prosperidad? ¿Cómo pueden ser apoyadas con una mayor colaboración pública y privada?
Marianne, María, Tony, un placer estar acá. Y definitivamente te puedo decir que las pequeñas y medianas empresas juegan un rol importantísimo en las economías tanto de América Latina como el Caribe. De acuerdo con el Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe, estas pequeñas y medianas empresas son el corazón nuestro. Creo que unos datos importantes arrojan que las pymes representan el 99.5% de las empresas en nuestros mercados, representan el 60%, que son generadores de empleo del 60%, tanto en América Latina como el Caribe, pero además representan el 25% del PIB en todos estos países. Entonces, ¿cuál es la relevancia? Es toda. Son el corazón nuestro. Y en el caso nuestro como organización, como sistema Coca-Cola, pues también están obviamente parte del corazón de nuestro trabajo, de nuestro día a día, sin lugar a duda. Ellas no solamente son los reactivadores económicos de las comunidades, de sus barrios, sino que también son parte cultural, son los psicólogos del barrio. Entonces, yo creo que la trascendencia no solamente está en la perspectiva económica, sino también social, sino también sustentable, sostenible en todos los barrios. Dentro de nosotros hemos venido trabajando muchísimos proyectos y obviamente nuestra meta siempre ha sido cómo llegamos mucho más allá. Hoy atendemos alrededor de 4 millones de tiendas de barrio o pequeños y medianos empresas en toda América Latina y el Caribe, de los 5 millones que hay. Entonces, la representatividad es grandísima, pero también es importante tener claro que son los generadores de empleo, pero unos generadores de empleo inclusivo. Allí hay muchas mujeres, allí hay muchos jóvenes, y es una apuesta que hay que seguir haciendo, no solamente desde la organización privada, sino también desde el sector público. Es muy importante reconocer que este trabajo no se hace solo, es un trabajo que se tiene que hacer de manera mancomunada con el sector público. Nosotros, las organizaciones, somos los que tenemos que salir y tender la mano y buscar un poco cómo aceleramos las economías y sobre todo después de una época como hemos vivido, una pandemia, que han sido los grandes afectados. Entonces, a tu pregunta te digo, es el corazón nuestro, es el corazón de la reactivación económica de América Latina y el Caribe, pero también es el corazón de empresas como las nuestras.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Ángela. COVID-19 caused us to rethink a great detail of the status quo when it comes to the labor market and ensuring equal access to economic opportunity. Tony, what role can multilateral institutions play in supporting inclusive economic opportunity and recovery as the region emerges from the pandemic?
I think the role of multilaterals is critical in doing one main thing, and that's centering again the Sustainable Development Goals. Lauryn Hill sang about it, Donny Hathaway, and there's a saying in the Caribbean, everything is everything. So we have to stop separating economic and social development. I know that on International Women's Day, the Honorable Minister, Dr. Virginia Albert Poyot in St. Lucia tabled the bill to end violence against women and girls. It's the domestic violence bill. We have to start doing critical work with governments to ensure that the legislation and the services are in place to make sure that women and all persons in society feel citizen security, that it's real for them. Then they're able to engage fully in the economic sphere. The other thing I think that's critical for multilaterals and that we've been doing a lot in the Caribbean is working on gender and shock responsive social protection, making sure that we have subsidized childcare, parental leave. I know that in Barbados as well, recently they have made a statement that they're taking away some discriminatory taxes on sanitary items as well as diapers. So these are things that allow women to be able to engage more in the economy. And then finally, it's working with the private and public sector to make sure that we have enabling environments for women in the world of work, whether it is using the principles, the women's economic empowerment principles, that UN Women and the Global Compact worked on, and gender gap analysis tools. So companies start to see, there's a gap for me. How can I do this better? The multilaterals provide the technical assistance for that, innovative support for projects that fill those gaps as well. I think these are things that we've been able to do thus far. And then finally, the data. If we don't know where women are in the economy, if we don't know what kind of challenges they're facing with regards to climate change and disaster resilience as well, especially relevant for the Caribbean, then we won't be able to have an enabling environment for them to have continuity with their businesses in the face of a natural hazard.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. Ángela, ¿cómo debemos repensar el status quo del comercio interno y la convencional?
Mira, Marianne, yo creo que se tiene que repensar y no es el cómo, sino es hay que hacerlo y hay que hacerlo ya. Anteriormente mencionaba un poco lo que pasó en la pandemia y yo creo que la pandemia nos obligó a repensar nuestra interacción y cómo además nosotros ayudamos a acelerar este tipo de negocios. Para nosotros fue un antes y un después en cómo nos relacionábamos con estas pequeñas empresas. Y lo digo un antes y un después porque en medio de la pandemia siempre ha habido una relación con nuestros socios embotelladores muy cercanos con estas tiendas de barrio, por ejemplo, pero con el tema de la pandemia hubo que repensar en cómo trabajábamos, en cómo nos colaborábamos. Te puedo contar que, por ejemplo, cuando estábamos en los picos más grandes de la pandemia, hubo proyectos como tienda abierta, tienda segura en algunos mercados que se llamaba de manera distinta. Y era cómo asegurábamos que estas personas podían volver a reactivar sus pequeñas tiendas para no quebrarse, para poder tener el sustento familiar. Y había un rol que nosotros teníamos que jugar. Entonces tuvimos ahí que repensar y cómo ayudábamos. Pero no solamente eso, yo creo que el gran cambio ha sido un proceso de digitalización y también de formalización de estos negocios. En el tema de formalización, un tema de capacitación, un tema de entendimiento de las mismas personas, cómo llevaban una contabilidad, cómo se organizaban, cómo empezaban a ahorrar, cómo se pagaban su propio salario, que muchas veces no lo hacían. Y este es un tema que uno cree que da por sentado que sucede. Y no funciona así en América Latina y el Caribe en muchísimos casos, y no te puedo decir en la mayoría de los casos. Pero en el tema de digitalización también dio un vuelco importantísimo y una aceleración inmensa. Yo te puedo decir que gracias a los procesos de digitalización y acompañamiento que hubo en estas pequeñas y medianas empresas, se estima que se ha optimizado el tiempo de estas personas que atienden las tiendas entre un 20 y un 30% en la forma como hacen pedidos, en la forma como se relacionan con sus proveedores. Entonces hay una serie de beneficios que obligó a volcarse y acelerar un poco lo que hace unos par de años veíamos como que iba a ser en 5 años. Esta crisis pandémica nos obligó a acelerarlo. Pero también quiero decirte una cosa, que nos sentimos muy orgullosos. Hoy el 80% de nuestros clientes están digitalizados. No estamos contentos con eso, vamos a llegar al 100%, pero creo que es un deber moral social que tenemos las organizaciones de no solamente asegurar que si a ellos les va bien, a nosotros también nos va bien. Y eso es toda una cadena de éxito que se va trasladando en el desarrollo de las economías en América Latina y el Caribe.
Estupendo, Ángela, muchísimas gracias. María, los sectores en los que las mujeres indígenas han participado típicamente, como los textiles, el turismo, agroindustria, se vieron particularmente afectados por la pandemia. ¿Cómo impactó esto en su trabajo en la Red Global de Empresas Indígenas y la Escuela Maya de Negocios?
Muchas gracias. Previo a responder a la pregunta en concreto, efectivamente las mujeres hemos sido más visibilizadas en estas actividades económicas, pero también es importante mencionar que en nuestra red tanto mundial como latinoamericana. Hay mujeres dueñas de empresas mineras, de petróleos, de banco, lo cual amplía nuestro horizonte sobre el rol de la mujer actualmente y todas ellas fueron afectadas tanto positiva como negativamente. Y un contexto en Guatemala donde, digamos, es muy claro la brecha que existe, tanto por la pobreza extrema, la desigualdad en las comunidades y también por el hecho de un difícil acceso o baja cobertura de acceso a salud, amplía mucho más la dificultad sobre estos aspectos frente a la pandemia. ¿Por qué digo que hay aspectos que afectaron negativamente? Por ejemplo, la pérdida en el acceso a insumos o a materia prima, también la productividad de los propios trabajadores por el daño emocional que esto ha ocasionado. También la descapitalización, lo cual limitó muchas veces el pago de obligaciones tributarias o de créditos que tenían acceso a los emprendimientos y por lo tanto había un sobreendeudamiento. También hubo pérdida de clientes y efectivamente tanto los textiles como los hechos a mano y el turismo fueron afectados considerablemente y esto de alguna manera impactó en la vida de las familias. Cada emprendedor, por ejemplo, genera no solo su autoempleo, sino también el empleo de 6 hasta 30 personas que dependieron de ese ingreso, por lo tanto, afectó la economía de las familias. Pero también creo que es importante mencionar que en el aspecto más positivo, por decirlo de alguna manera, nosotros identificamos que muchos de nuestros socios que han pasado por la Escuela Maya de Negocios tuvieron la capacidad de cambiar o replantear su modelo de negocios buscando una oportunidad de mercado frente a esa nueva coyuntura. Y por el otro lado, se activaron las ventas en línea, por ejemplo, lo cual requirió capacitación y comunicación respecto a manejo de redes sociales. En algunos casos fue la época en el cual lograron vender mucho más productos porque también hay una demanda en el mercado mundial de productos más artesanales o sin químicos y esto también ha permitido ese crecimiento económico que no solamente apoya al emprendedor, sino que en este caso apoya al ingreso familiar, a la economía familiar y por lo tanto al desarrollo de las comunidades.
Estupendo, muchas gracias María. Muchas gracias también a Tony y Ángela por su participación en estos importantes temas. Thank you, Tony, Ángela, and Maria for your participation on these important topics. I'd now like to introduce Germán Santillán, founder of Oaxacanita Chocolate, a chocolate company empowering indigenous communities in Oaxaca, Mexico, and featured entrepreneur from the Young American Business Trust Innovation Challenge. Over to you.
Hola, ¿cómo están todas? Primero que nada, es un enorme gusto poder compartir este espacio con ustedes y quisiera yo compartir una inquietud que tengo, pues debido al trabajo que nosotros estamos realizando. Quisiera preguntarles, primero que nada, ¿cómo a través del tiempo sus organizaciones se han asegurado de que los esfuerzos implementados para el desarrollo económico equitativo impacten y lleguen directamente a las comunidades más vulnerables de la región?
Y no sé si aquí es responder abiertamente, pero digamos, uno de los aspectos importantes dentro de nuestra experiencia como red de empresarios indígenas es que nosotros hemos venido construyendo un modelo de desarrollo territorial en comunidades indígenas, cómo las propias comunidades pueden generar una organización empresarial o también una organización a través de lo que nosotros hemos denominado clúster comunitarios indígenas, en donde diferentes actividades económicas nos organizamos para responder a la demanda de un mercado global. Pero por el otro lado, también hacer la conciencia respecto a valorar los productos y servicios que desarrollamos, es decir, valorarnos nosotros mismos como productores, como empresarios indígenas, y por el otro lado, sabemos que el producto puede satisfacer una necesidad que puede ser fundamental en la vida de las comunidades en general, ¿verdad? Y por el otro lado, también en esta pandemia permitieron crear, por ejemplo, algunas empresas para dar tratamientos respecto al tema del COVID a través de el procesamiento de medicinas naturales.
Germán, si quieres, entonces en mi caso continúo. Mira, haces una pregunta que es muy importante y yo creo que dado el contexto actual, definitivamente en nuestro caso, las organizaciones como el Sistema Coca-Cola nos hemos volcado a trabajar en todo el tema que es trabajo inclusivo. Una perspectiva de lo que es con la mujer, pero también desde los jóvenes. El tema de mujeres, pues venimos trabajando desde el 2010, que se hizo un compromiso de empoderar económicamente a mujeres alrededor del mundo, 5 millones de ellas. Llegamos a los 6 millones, tenemos un nuevo compromiso que está a punto de anunciarse, pero será bastante ambicioso en cómo generamos productividad económica y social en las mujeres. Pero hay un tema que es muy relevante y creo que toca el corazón de las economías actuales y es los jóvenes. Los jóvenes se han visto, han sido de los grandes damnificados en todo este proceso de desaceleración económica. Y lo digo desde la perspectiva no solamente en que no encuentran trabajo, pero también no hay formalización detrás de ellos. Las oportunidades del primer empleo se han vuelto un problema grandísimo porque se exige cierta experiencia. Entonces nosotros hemos volcado recursos, grandes recursos económicos detrás de ellos. Hoy programas en América Latina y el Caribe han impactado a más de 650,000 jóvenes con el fin de buscar opciones, de generar empleo, de ponerles su primer empleo, de una u otra forma también de formalizarlos, cosa que es muy importante si uno quiere buscar proyectos que sean sostenibles y largos en el tiempo. Pero también creo que hay otra cosa que es muy importante y es cómo nosotros aseguramos que estos sean en mercados que son de alta relevancia y que estos mismos jóvenes lleven programas que se pueden ser replicados en otros. Nosotros hoy tenemos programas en Brasil, en Ecuador, en Argentina, en Uruguay, en México, en Colombia, que buscan primer empleo, que buscan empleos, generación de empleos para los jóvenes. Y te doy un par de ejemplos. En el 2009 en Brasil nosotros arrancamos con un proyecto que se llama Colectivo, donde más de 295,000 jóvenes se han visto beneficiados. En el caso de México 2019 anunciamos a más de un programa para incorporar a nuestro sistema, cuando digo nuestro sistema es nuestros socios embotelladores y la compañía Coca-Cola, vincularlos a la familia y al sistema Coca-Cola. Y así tengo muchos ejemplos, pero yo creo que esto es un tema que las organizaciones y el sector privado no solamente podemos ver y decir si es un problema, no, detrás de cada problema el sector público tiene que traer una solución. Esto no es un problema de los gobiernos, esto no es un problema de los alcaldes, esto es un problema social en los que todos tenemos que venir a aportar. Y para nosotros nos llena de orgullo, ¿por qué? Porque seguimos siendo fieles a nuestro propósito de refrescar al mundo y hacer la diferencia en este caso. Muchas gracias.
So thank you
So
so much.
Herman, oh, sorry, I was just going to say something quickly
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
From the UN and UN Women in particular perspective is that our goal is to make sure that in everything that we do, we leave no one behind. And in order to do that, when we're designing our programs, we make sure that those who are most marginalized are part of the design of the program, because they can speak for themselves and tell us what they most need, whether it is an economic empowerment or any other form of programming that we have on social development. And that's how we are ensuring that we get to that intersectional lens. Of course, as the organization with the mandate for gender equality and women's empowerment at the UN, we always use the gender lens, but we look at age, class, race, ethnicity, nationality as well. In our region, we have a lot of older women who are in the farming industry, and we have a lot of older women who are taking care of multiple generations because their children have gone across to other borders to find work. And so making sure that all people have access to opportunities is the only way in which we're successful.
Muchísimas gracias por sus respuestas. Quiero agradecer muchísimo el espacio que brindan para jóvenes como yo, que podemos estar compartiendo ideas con ustedes, ya que, pues bueno, quiero, quiero darle un principal reconocimiento a la Young Americas Business Trust, a la Fundación Interamericana y a la Secretaría de Cumbres de las Américas por también impulsar el trabajo que nosotros hacemos con el reto Innovación. Y bueno, con muchísimo gusto, todas ustedes tienen su casa aquí en la Mixteca oaxaqueña. Es un enorme gusto poder estar conectado con todas ustedes. Muchísimas gracias por el trabajo que realizan.
Gracias a ti, Germán, y a los panelistas. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mauricio Rodas and Governor Larraín.
Muchas gracias, Marianne. Para mí es un verdadero gusto poder compartir este espacio y darle la bienvenida al gobernador de la región metropolitana de Santiago de Chile, Claudio Orrego Larraín. Muchísimas gracias, gobernador, por acompañarnos y desarrollar este diálogo con nosotros. Hace 2 semanas, la región metropolitana de Santiago de Chile emprendió una colaboración con la Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center del Atlantic Council para desarrollar una agenda integral de acciones que permitan proteger a la población de los efectos del calor extremo y nombró a la primera Chief Heat Officer de Sudamérica, lo cual refleja la seriedad y el compromiso de su gobierno para enfrentar la amenaza que representan la elevación, la amenaza que representa la elevación de las temperaturas a nivel mundial. Gobernador, yo quisiera preguntarle cuál es su perspectiva respecto a los riesgos precisamente que representa el calor extremo para la salud de los santiaguinos y para la provisión de servicios básicos, como por ejemplo el suministro de agua, y de qué manera las acciones que está emprendiendo su administración permiten enfrentar esta amenaza de mejor forma. Bienvenido, gobernador. Está en silencio.
Ahí sí, ya. Muchas gracias, Mauricio, y a los organizadores de este espacio. Desde aquí, desde el Cono Sur, desde Santiago de Chile, un gran abrazo para todos los que están participando de este seminario. Efectivamente, nosotros somos parte hace 2 semanas de esta alianza de ciudades por la acción contra el calor extremo a nivel global. Estamos padeciendo los efectos del cambio climático. Nosotros decimos que el cambio climático no es fake news y en el caso de nuestra ciudad está a la vista. Nosotros proveemos el 70% del agua potable de Santiago viene de los glaciares y de la nieve de la cordillera. Lamentablemente, años tras años, luego de 13 años de sequía, tenemos cada día menos nieve, cada día menos agua y las temperaturas siguen aumentando. Entonces, primera amenaza, tenemos una amenaza a la fuente fundamental del agua, que es la que le da vida a la ciudad. Ya lo vimos en Sudáfrica con Ciudad del Cabo, lo dramático que puede ser esto. Segundo, hemos visto además que el calor extremo mata más gente en el mundo que todas las otras implicancias del cambio climático sumadas. Y en consecuencia, ¿cuáles son las poblaciones más afectadas? Los adultos mayores, las zonas más pobres, y en consecuencia tenemos que hacer una acción general como ciudad, que es lo que estamos haciendo hoy día. ¿Qué es lo que hemos hecho bien concreto? Aparte de decretar la emergencia climática, apenas asumimos el cargo hace 8 meses, crear este convenio donde tenemos nuestra Chief Heat Officer de la ciudad y de la región. Estamos impulsando un espacio público-privado que se llama el Foro del Agua para regular toda la implicancia de este calor extremo en las fuentes de agua de la ciudad. Estamos construyendo un plan de acción climática que tiene dentro de lo cual el tema hídrico del calor extremo es fundamental y estamos impulsando proyectos específicos como por ejemplo los techos verdes en la ciudad para reducir el calor en distintos lugares y también exigirle a todos los proyectos que aprobemos nosotros como gobierno de la ciudad un certificado de eficiencia hídrica en esta materia. Te menciono algunas acciones que son desde el ámbito de las políticas públicas hasta acciones muy concretas que van en la línea de hacernos cargo de esta ola de calor extremo que es una de las implicancias más letales del cambio climático en el mundo.
Muchas gracias, gobernador. El inicio de un nuevo mandato presidencial en Chile despierta evidentemente expectativas sobre la necesaria colaboración que debe existir entre diferentes niveles de gobierno en materia de combate al cambio climático, pero también es cada vez más evidente la importancia de una integración regional en torno a este tema. Y usted, desde la posición del liderazgo que ejerce, siendo Santiago de Chile una de las precisamente ciudades líderes en la acción contra el calor extremo, quisiera que nos comente cuáles son los aspectos más importantes en que se debe basar un esquema de cooperación entre las ciudades con el gobierno nacional, así como con otras ciudades y actores a nivel regional para enfrentar con éxito los efectos del cambio climático.
Mira, Mauricio, yo creo que la gobernanza de los fenómenos ambientales y climáticos exige mucha innovación. Nosotros creemos que un gobierno de una ciudad no puede enfrentar por sí solo el desafío del cambio climático y en este caso el calor extremo y la crisis hídrica. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que estamos haciendo? Primero, crear distintas instancias de cooperación con la academia, con el mundo privado, con la sociedad civil, con el mundo nacional. Tenemos un consejo asesor de cambio climático, tenemos este foro del agua en que participamos distintas entidades, tenemos de hecho la nueva ministra de Medio Ambiente que acaba de asumir, era parte de nuestro consejo asesor, así que tenemos una comunicación bastante cercana. Ella ha nombrado a una encargada nacional del tema del agua que se relaciona con nosotros, y desde el punto de vista de cooperación internacional, Mauricio, yo te diría, nuestra gran apuesta es la cooperación descentralizada, es decir, sin perjuicio de lo que hagan los gobiernos a nivel nacional, nosotros creemos que tenemos que profundizar el vínculo con otras ciudades que están enfrentando retos muy similares a los nuestros. Ya somos parte de la red de C40, de la red de ciudades resilientes y ahora de esta alianza de ciudades por la acción contra el calor extremo. Y esto significa que lo que estamos buscando es una cooperación primero relevante desde el punto de vista de los temas. No nos interesa cooperar por cooperar, sino que en temas que tengan mucho que ver con nuestra realidad. Segundo, yo diría una cooperación bastante utilitaria, es decir, queremos sacar lecciones y compartir experiencias nuestras para generar acción. Creemos que el mundo está cansado y al menos los habitantes, los 8 millones de habitantes de Santiago están cansados de diagnósticos, lo que quieren es acción. Entonces, junto con esta cooperación de ciudades, es cooperación para la acción lo que estamos buscando.
Y eso me conduce fácilmente a mi siguiente pregunta, gobernador, y es, en junio próximo se va a realizar la 9ª Cumbre de las Américas bajo el lema Construir un futuro sostenible, resiliente y equitativo para nuestro hemisferio. ¿Cuál cree usted que debe ser el planteamiento de las ciudades en este espacio para propiciar una mayor participación de las mismas en esquemas de integración regional que no solo, que contemplen no solo a los diferentes niveles de gobierno, sino también a la sociedad civil? ¿Cuál debe ser el planteamiento de las ciudades en la próxima Cumbre de las Américas, gobernador?
A ver, mira, yo creo que ha sido un largo camino para que el mundo de los estados reconozca, y la cooperación internacional, cuán relevante es el rol de las ciudades en el combate, no solamente al cambio climático, a todos los grandes flagelos que estamos viviendo hoy día como humanidad. Llámese narcotráfico, llámese el fenómeno de la migración, llámese el COVID, llámese por supuesto el cambio climático y los temas de desigualdad y de pobreza y de escasez hídrica. Yo te diría que en todos estos grandes temas, las grandes discusiones se dan a nivel de los estados, pero la acción se produce a nivel de las ciudades. En consecuencia, yo diría, quizás lo primero respecto a esta Cumbre de la América es que las ciudades tengamos un rol y tengamos un espacio en la mesa y se reconozca este rol fundamental e ineludible en la acción en contra de estos fenómenos. Yo reitero, tú puedes pensar distintos temas respecto a la migración, pero al final esto, junto con las políticas nacionales, se traduce en la acción de las ciudades frente a la migración, la acción de las ciudades frente al narcotráfico, la acción de las ciudades frente a la pandemia o bien el cambio climático. Ahora, Yo sí, simplemente me gustaría, junto con pedir este espacio de presencia de las ciudades a nivel de este debate, diálogo a nivel internacional, hacer también un llamado a las agencias de cooperación internacional, Mauricio. Yo creo que durante mucho tiempo hemos dependido de las ciudades fundamentalmente de la caridad de los estados nacionales, de cuán buena o no disposición tienen de colaborar con la labor exigente y también demandante que tenemos a nivel de las ciudades. Yo creo que llegó el momento de abrir el espacio de la cooperación internacional para tener líneas de crédito y líneas de apoyo directos a las ciudades de parte de organismos como el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, el Banco Mundial, el Banco Africano de Desarrollo, en fin, podríamos hablar de muchas de estas entidades multilaterales que tienen que reconocer como actor válido y una contraparte también necesaria al mundo de las ciudades y no solamente el de los estados-naciones, por importantes que estos sean. Yo diría, esos son mis dos enfoques, o sea, un lugar en la mesa, reconocimiento del rol de las ciudades y una línea de financiamiento directo para estos grandes proyectos a nivel de ciudades en el mundo.
Ciertamente, gobernador, el sistema financiero internacional fue diseñado pensando en gobiernos nacionales y no en gobiernos locales. Y creo yo que en función de lo que usted acaba de señalar precisamente, el rol cada vez más importante de las ciudades para abordar varios de los principales retos a nivel global, es necesario promover reformas a ese sistema financiero para convertirlo en más amable para las ciudades, para generar facilidades de crédito directa para las mismas, de tal manera de poder enfrentar de mejor forma esas amenazas que tienen que enfrentar en el día a día. Muchísimas gracias, gobernador. Ha sido un diálogo muy interesante. Now, I would like to turn it over to Leslie Gutiérrez, Lead Environmental Justice Organizer at Comunidades Organizando el Poder y la Acción Latina. Welcome, Leslie.
Gracias, Mauricio. Gracias, Gobernador Orrego. For the second panel, we'll be discussing green economic growth. It's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Anton Edmonds, former ambassador to the United States from St. Lucia and permanent representative to the Organization of American States, Sonia Guajajara, Executive Director of the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, APIB, Diana Chavez, co-founder of Jungle Food and Strategic Alliance, Coordinator for Impact Hub San Jose, and Pedro Ambromove, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Program at the Open Society Foundation. Welcome. So Latin America and the Caribbean lags behind the rest of the world on environmentally sustainable post-COVID-19 spending and investment. In 2020, only 2.2% of long-term recovery spending was environmentally friendly compared to 19.2% globally. Ambassador Edmonds, what factors explained this gap and what initiatives are needed to boost sustainable investment in the region?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak, to answer the question. I think for some countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, some would take umbrage to the idea that we're in a post-COVID environment. A reminder, I think, to all of us is that post-pandemic spending will continue to be dragged down by spikes of infections and the cost of investment that governments have made in the region as it relates to healthcare and other social support. So we're not quite out of the woods as yet. Best case scenarios indicate that we're looking at 2024 to return to pre-pandemic levels of economic output. And for many countries in the region, that level of growth was anemic as best. Job loss has been catastrophic, and obviously we've seen, as I'm alluding to, the largest contraction of GDP growth on record in terms of Latin America and the Caribbean. I think one of the most important things when we look at the space and the investment and sustainable economic development is that we should not overlook the fact that we're talking about multiple countries of various sizes and in different stages of policy development and application. So you have small countries in the Caribbean of 50,000 people, and then you have countries with tens of millions of people in sort of broader Latin America. I think one of the other things that we have to be cognizant of is that we have a region where economic growth, green or otherwise, has been stymied by climatic events. In the Caribbean, of course, that is especially true, but it happens everywhere else. In Central America, you see flooding. as well as in Guyana and Latin America as well. And I think most importantly is that we have a region, for the most part, where access to capital for governments is limited because of high indebtedness. Now, that said, specific to green and sustainable economic growth in the region, I think we have a space, especially in the Caribbean, a region that itself has been one of the largest advocates for the green and the even blue economy. I think we all have an opportunity to push, to support policy formation and push implementation over the threshold. Most importantly, I think we have to deploy sustainable solutions. I think one of the key things about sustainability is that it has to be not just environmental, but it has to be economically sustainable for countries in the region for it to survive. One of the things that we do need to do is we do need to devise new financial tools. I hope to be able to speak more about that. And I think one of the things that we do have as a collective, all of us speaking here and otherwise, and as it relates to the summit, is we have an opportunity and we need to be helpful and not prescriptive as it relates to unattainable goals and metrics when it comes to green investment, when it comes to economic growth, and recognize that the aspirational goals that many countries had, they haven't given up on them. They basically have been delayed. I think ultimately where we are now is the opportunity to revisit and help reboot these commitments to pre-pandemic initiatives related to sustainable development and investment in that space.
Thank you for that. And as a follow-up, many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have taken on debt in response to the pandemic, limiting their capacity to fund sustainable development initiatives. Eastern Caribbean countries are among the most debt burdened in the world. How can governments, the international community, and the private sector support Latin America and the Caribbean in prioritizing sustainable long-term recovery spending?
Well, I think one of the things is, as the region reboots, is that the deployment of new greener technologies towards the traditional sectors is a place that we have to look at. Manufacturing, construction, tourism. I think maybe the incentivizing of new and green technology is something that governments can do and should do, even as we look at investment in new sectors, when we look at renewable energy and energy efficiency. Ultimately, how the region builds, notably the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean, how we address schools, houses, so standards, and other public spaces to face natural disasters, and how we address clean transportation are going to be sort of areas where we're going to have to focus attention. But the reality is that the national debt issue is one that will not go away. So investing in resilience, sustainable development is going to be expensive, especially on the sovereign side of the equation. So that's sort of the government borrowing side. So there's a need for us to figure out how do we encourage private sector investment or private sector green investment in the region, especially in the Caribbean. I'm of the opinion that we may have to establish the creation of or create special purpose vehicles. I think specifically because the private sector financial institutions may not have an appetite for smaller economies in the Caribbean, that may be an avenue that we have to take on. I think green resilience specific funds are sort of the avenue. And ultimately, that's where sort of the development community institutions, the multilateral community comes into play. I recently joined the IDB, and that organization has a Vision 2025 that looks at support for small and medium-sized firms, promotion of a digital economy, and gender equity as critically important. But there's also the recognition that all of this has to be encased in a resilient blanket for it to work, for it to be sustainable. And I think all multilateral entities are going to have to sort of follow that sort of mold. Ultimately, resiliency and sustainability are inextricably intertwined. You can't separate them. And for all of us, the ability to deliver in a multi-pronged way, aligning initiatives of what the region needs and says it needs versus developing best practices in a vacuum is ultimately how I think we can be helpful and how the region is going to see its way forward.
Thank you for that. Now, this next question is for Sonia. You are a renowned human rights leader who fights against exploitative economic practices and priorities that contribute to environmental destruction in the Amazon. What is your vision for a more sustainable and just economic approach?
Olá, gente, boa tarde. Muito obrigada pelo convite, pela oportunidade de estar aqui com vocês. Saúdo aqui todos os meus companheiras painelistas, Diana, Anthony, e cumprimento, né, meu amigo Pedro, a todos e todas. Bom, talvez o que eu dizia aqui abre assim, uma certa polêmica que em 3 minutos não darão conta de resolver. Mas ainda assim é importante lançar algumas ideias, né, para que a gente possa ver se a gente consegue plantar novas ideias nas mentes das pessoas. E para isso nós temos aqui no Brasil, né, o lançamento do Reflorestar Mentes, uma iniciativa que foi lançada na 2ª Marcha das Mulheres Indígenas, e essa marcha que chamou Mulheres Originárias Reflorestando Mentes para a Cura da Terra, porque é importante, né, esse reflorestar dos pensamentos, das ideias, dos corações das pessoas. E com isso produzimos um futuro diferente. Quando essa pergunta é colocada, eu sinto que ela parte justamente da percepção de que a humanidade tem falhado muito nos projetos econômicos que implementou até aqui, nos últimos séculos. Tem falhado desde o avanço do colonialismo europeu sobre o restante do mundo. Tem falhado desde o surgimento do capitalismo até a forma como conhecemos hoje. Essa falha prolongada e profunda tem imposto à maioria dos habitantes dessa terra, humanos e não humanos, um projeto de sofrimento, de privação, de fome e de morte. E como humanidade, nós chegamos a um ponto em que não podemos ignorar que esses modelos econômicos baseados na desigualdade, na ultraexploração da mãe terra, na acumulação e no desperdício desmedido, nos levarão à nossa aniquilação e à destruição do nosso planeta. São esses modelos que trouxeram a invasão colonial para nossos povos, resultando em genocídio para nós, povos indígenas, e a destruição para a nossa terra. Então, eu gostaria de propor um exercício que tal invertermos, né, a ordem dessa pergunta, e ao invés de falarmos em desenvolvimento econômico, que use práticas sustentáveis e equitativas, falarmos em formas de vida sustentáveis e equitativas que gerem uma economia benéfica a todos e todas. Bom, eu acredito que esse é um dos ensinamentos que nós, povos originários, podemos compartilhar com todo o resto do mundo. Nossa cultura de vida não é baseada em estabelecer uma lógica de ganhos acumulativos e desiguais em prol do individualismo, que se realizem na exploração destrutiva dos recursos da natureza. Nossa cultura é baseada na ideia do bem viver, numa simbiose entre nossas vidas e a Mãe Terra. É claro que eu não estou propondo que todos voltem à floresta, mas que levemos a sério a tarefa de repensar nossos padrões de acumulação e os valores que norteiam nossas vidas. E é por isso que nós estamos enfrentando todos os dias todo esse pacote de destruição que está sendo pautado neste governo. Todo esse pacote que está pautado no Congresso Nacional, né, que é contra a liberação da exploração dos minérios nos territórios indígenas, o garimpo, que já sabemos bem a consequência, o projeto de lei da grilagem, que premia invasores, o projeto de lei 490, que acaba acabando de vez com a demarcação de territórios indígenas no país, e aí nós defendemos, né, o uso sustentável por meio da descentralização do uso da terra. Lutamos por todas as democracias e principalmente pela democratização do uso da terra com práticas, né, mais respeitosas, mais sustentáveis e mais distribuída para todos aqueles que vivem e que dependem diretamente da terra.
Thank you, Sonia. I really value your perspective and how important it is to take that into consideration and for world leaders to hear that. So thank you. Pedro, can you describe the connection between funding green development initiatives such as those described by Sonia and creating more resilient and inclusive democracies?
Of course, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It was great to hear Ambassador Edmonds, and always inspired by Sonia, and saluting everyone. I would like, I think the connection between the climate movement and democracy is particularly strong in the Global South. It won't be possible to have a green transition in those spaces, and Latin America is definitely an example, with such a high inequality, without putting together the fight against inequality and the fight against climate change. It is, and we are seeing, ironically, much more in the global north than in the global south, this connection, right? So talking about climate justice, right, in the US or in Europe, now it is to talk about jobs, talk about racial justice, talk about the protection of indigenous rights, talking about gender justice, right? It is the connection of those things is clear. In the South, much less. It is many times we're hearing people talking about conservation, and as if there was an opposition between development and inclusion and climate. And the only way that we'll be able to bridge those things, to show that the climate justice perspective in Latin America is one that will bring more inclusion, is through democratic institutions, right? If you maintain this in the power of technocrats that will think what is the best specific solution to deal with the deforestation, or to deal with any other challenges that climate change bring, it won't include the people that are most affected by climate change. If we want to incorporate that in the political agenda, right, we need to have the voices of indigenous people, the voice of Afro-Latino communities participating in the debate with the space to decide and being actors of this change, right? We need to show that in the case of the Amazon, for example, we won't stop deforestation in the region if we don't address the social conditions of the region, and the social conditions won't be addressed if deforestation continues, right? And this needs to be clear. And the only way in which we can be clear is by supporting democratic movements, supporting and embedding on democratic institutions to be the arena in which those discussions would have advanced in the region.
Thank you, Pedro. And Latin America and the Caribbean possess vast natural resources, such as lithium, hydropower, and offshore wind, but also the human knowledge and the creativity to pursue new and traditional methods of development, agriculture and energy production. This question is for Ambassador Edmonds. Small island development states like St. Lucia are particularly vulnerable to climate change and food insecurity. What initiatives, innovative approaches have you adopted in response, and what implementation and or resource barriers do you face?
Let me focus on the issue of food security specifically, because we know of the climate change sort of impact. I think the issue of food security has become a glaring one that countries like mine and others in the Caribbean must deal with. Obviously, beyond climatic related events, we're sort of just coming to grips. I mean, I say just coming to grips, but we're coming to grips, for example, seeing like events of what's going on in Ukraine, for example, impacting the cost of wheat. And we're even seeing in the region, the government of Guyana basically indicating an interest in exploring whether this is an area for that country to invest and for that country to grow food products. In the Caribbean specifically, we've been net importers of food for a long time, dependent on the global supply chain and a regional transportation system itself, which is not particularly robust. So it's become increasingly expensive to feed ourselves and our citizens. With development, also has come the unfortunate case of a move away from agriculture, and especially as it relates to monocrops that we depended upon. For countries in the Caribbean, the drive to more efficient service-based economies, I think should not be slowed, but the cost of inputs in terms of the ability to feed ourselves needs to be recalibrated. I think a couple of the areas where we have to focus attention on, and I'm not sure we're doing it enough as yet, is we need to invest more in agricultural education. That's one area. When you think about agriculture, my father was in the industry intercropping, where you sort of plant multiple products within a field. Land management is an issue that we probably have not done the best job of when you look at how we deploy hotels and other sort of large infrastructure investments in areas which were traditionally agricultural plains. So those are areas where we're going to have to focus. I think opportunities for us are the promotion of farm-to-table programs where the product can be grown to feed people as well as to be able to sell it to the hospitality industry, especially for countries like mine, when we're very much tourism-based. And then ultimately, the research and deployment of new techniques to increase yield and supports by institutions and governments in terms of marketing and payment regimes are going to be critical. We have a lot of small farmers who don't necessarily get paid on time. And these are the areas where we have to do a lot more work to make sure that they are sustained in that livelihood. I want to close on the issue of energy as one of those you mentioned. I think, it's interesting for us in the Caribbean. We see in Colombia and in other countries, wind and the issue of decarbonization and a major investment in for example, wind, as I mentioned, Colombia. I think for us in the Caribbean, it's interesting because we do have countries, we have Trinidad and Tobago, but we now have Guyana and Suriname, who are now sort of fossil fuel possible growth economies. And one of the intriguing things, but I caution, is that we don't do damage. While we look at sustainable development and green investment, we don't do damage to countries that are lucky enough to have these fossil fuel resources, especially considering their stated interest to use the windfall to underwrite sustainable growth. So it's a large package of things that we need to do in the region. And a balanced approach is basically what hopefully will drive us forward.
Thank you. Sonia, Indigenous science informs sustainable practices to advance green economies. What tactics should be adopted across the Americas, particularly from the Amazon region, that center Indigenous leadership and voice?
Bom, veja, eu acredito que a chave para nossas discussões, né, esteja justamente em percebermos que existe uma conexão muito profunda entre a floresta e nós, povos indígenas do mundo todo. Nós não sobrevivemos sem floresta em pé. E não é apenas nós que habitamos as áreas mais preservadas, mas todo mundo. Há milênios somos nós, povos originários, os principais responsáveis por manejar e preservar, né, esses biomas ao redor de todo o mundo. E existe um estudo que aponta que mais de 80% da biodiversidade global é manejada pelos povos originários e que correspondemos apenas a 5% da população global. Agora, esses 5% de guardiões da floresta, que são os que mais sofrem os efeitos das mudanças climáticas, que são os mais perseguidos, né, justamente por querer preservar o que é bem de todos, recebe somente 1% dos recursos destinados ao financiamento climático global. Então, assim, eu acho isso uma grande injustiça. Mas voltando à sua pergunta, né, portanto, me parece novamente que nós precisamos inverter a lógica das coisas. Nós já somos lideranças no debate e na prática de um modelo de vida sustentável. É importante que o mundo conheça esta liderança e nos garanta condições para aplicar nossas práticas de cuidado e de cura da terra. E isso por um motivo bem simples, né? Para a sobrevivência coletiva. Importante ressaltar que a Declaração das Nações Unidas para a Floresta Tropicais de 2014, o Acordo de Paris, já reconhecem, né, que é importante, que é preciso unificar o conhecimento tradicional com o conhecimento científico como uma das últimas alternativas para conter as mudanças climáticas, né? Mas isso precisa vir para a prática, né? Precisa vir para as políticas subnacionais. Nós organizamos nossos conhecimentos e técnicas de lidar com a terra de diversas formas. Uma delas são os planos de gestão territorial e ambiental das terras indígenas. Aqui no Brasil, nós conseguimos, né, a Política Nacional de Gestão Territorial e Ambiental em Terras Indígenas no ano de 2012, porém, nesse governo, ela está totalmente engavetada, né? E é importante dizer que esses planos de gestão são construídos de forma coletiva pelos povos indígenas, né? E ali a gente traz elementos essenciais para a defesa dos territórios, manejo e recuperação de áreas degradadas, manejo comunitário de produtos agroflorestais para a manutenção da floresta, né, da floresta em pé e fortalecimento da comunidade que a defende. Então, são práticas que nós desenvolvemos milenarmente e que não custam caro para o Brasil, a sua implementação, né, e a implementação do plano desses PGTAs, né? Então, nós fizemos um levantamento, mais ou menos, dos custos, né, e isso gira em torno de 265 mil a 4,4 milhões de dólares, a depender da extensão da terra indígena. É um valor irrisório quando comparado com grandes projetos de infraestrutura, com acordos comerciais, com o valor das guerras, né? Então, eu acredito que nossa prioridade como humanidade tem de ser salvar nosso planeta. E, para isso, nós temos de investir nas soluções adequadas, as soluções reais. E nós, povos indígenas, temos muitas delas para compartilhar com o mundo. E uma delas é a demarcação dos nossos territórios. E ressaltar que, sem a demarcação dos territórios indígenas, não há solução para a crise climática e não há solução para superar toda essa crise ambiental que o mundo vive hoje. Portanto, também, né, se não há proteção dos territórios, não há proteção da biodiversidade, e aí o planeta todo está em risco. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, and now for the next question, I'll be asking Diana first and then Pedro. Climate change transcends borders, so how can regional cooperation in pursuit of advancing a green and blue economy address some of the hemisphere's most pressing challenges, such as migration, economic inequality, and food insecurity?
Well, I first want to talk about the need for a transition to regenerative agriculture and to regenerative practices in our food systems, because our current food systems have been designed around economies of scale, international trading, and subsidies of industrial agriculture. And all these like greenhouse gas emissions related to agriculture are results of heavy plowing, use of chemicals, and international transportation. So when we try to go or to transition toward traditional agriculture or integrated agricultural practices such as regenerative systems, syntropic agriculture, permaculture, and so on, we have this very difficult challenge, right, to make it into practice, because there is a big gap between starting these emerging systems in our local economies and having the maturity enough to receive investment from the regional ecosystem. So right now, this gap can be experimented. For example, I'm gonna give 2 examples. The first example has been through Jungle Project. We were trying to promote regenerative systems based with breadfruit as an alternative for food security of our communities. And in this process, the breadfruit is not rice, is not wheat. So there are no subsidies whatsoever for this kind of systems, which make it even more costly for us to create new markets with potential products from our communities. So the way we have been able to achieve certain progress into our initiatives have been in collaboration with companies like Patagonia Provisions that have helped us to invest in R&D, trying to get to in achieving their food standards, and in order for them to bring breadfruit to the U.S. market. So basically, within 3 years, they have like give support buying, you know, like the products that we have been testing on. All up to the point in which we achieved their standards, and we were able to give and ensure a proper sale of the final product. This wouldn't be possible if companies like them didn't give us like the opportunity to do so. And still, there is certain difficulties with COVID and all to keep progressing, and a way that we have tapped these challenges have been through philanthropic support. Now, another example is this systemic venture called Nangu that is trying to start in Costa Rica. And what they want to do is to transform large industrial farms into regenerative systems, integrating smallholder farmers and support services, all through a market-driven regeneration innovation network. The issue, what is the issue? Right now, they are thinking in a big scale, right? Trying to connect or to respond to how the food system is already set up. But when they are seeking for investment, the investment sector is having certain resistance to support them because they are in an early stage. So this time gap of maturity that is needed for this kind of agricultural systems is preventing for investment to come into the communities, and these impact solutions to emerge and to become a reality, and to actually give solutions to these pressing problems that we have. So in summary, I feel it's imperative and urgent that regional cooperation directs its effort to close this gap through access for more risk investment. And from Impact Hub Global Network, we want to become this bridge, you know, between the different corporations and the local communities to make this ecosystem and these entrepreneurships happen.
Thank you so much, Diana. And now I want to take a moment to introduce Ignacio Estrada, founder of Green Construera and Sustainable Construction Solution, and a future entrepreneur from Young America's Business Trust Innovaction Challenge. Ignacio is spotlighted and asked the following question to Pedro. Entonces, adelante.
Sí, muchas gracias, Leslie. Para mí es un placer estar aquí. Primero que nada, agradecer al YABAT, a la Organización de Estados Americanos, al maestro Edgar, a la Secretaría de Innovación, Ciencia y Tecnología de Jalisco, que me da la oportunidad de compartir con ustedes este espacio. Y así como lo dijo Leslie, nosotros nos dedicamos a la construcción y a la construcción ecológica. Y en ese sentido voy a hacer una pregunta muy personal. Anteriormente, en esta etapa de COVID y en esta contingencia ambiental, el secretario de las Naciones Unidas, representado por Antonio Guterres, durante una de sus intervenciones en ONU TV, mencionaba que la verdadera crisis ha sido humanitaria y nos llama a todos a colaborar en solidaridad. En este sentido, estoy convencido que el valor más importante de todas las organizaciones en pro y en apoyo al crecimiento económico verde en materia mundial está en las personas. Quisiera preguntarle a Pedro, inclusive al embajador, a Diana y a Sonia, ¿qué hacen ustedes para mantener motivadas a las personas que colaboran en sus organizaciones de manera personal, para que éstas se mantengan motivadas en pro de un crecimiento económico verde? Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Ignacio. Qué buena pregunta. Y en verdad yo creo que justamente, o sea, el tema que estábamos discutiendo antes, que es conectar el tema climático, no solamente con un tema de preservación, pero un tema que tiene que ver justamente con la vida de las personas. O sea, el cambio climático afecta y afecta particularmente los más vulnerables de manera muy profunda, ¿no? Y muchas de las cuestiones que estamos discutiendo, o sea, las personas que son interesadas en temas de, lucha contra la pobreza, de desarrollo económico, de inclusión, de migración, todos esos temas están tan afectados por el tema del cambio climático que es necesario conectar, ¿no? Y yo creo que muchas veces incluso, y es tan bueno escuchar a Sonia acá, que los pueblos indígenas muchas veces hacen ya hace tiempo esa conexión entre las cosas, que nosotros muchas veces tenemos dificultad, y ahora comprender eso me parece muy importante. ¿Y cuándo se comprende eso? O sea, cuando se comprende que trabajar en un cambio de la economía del Triángulo Norte en Centroamérica, ¿no? Para adaptarse, y de Caribe, para adaptarse a los efectos del cambio climático, para tener una economía que justamente pueda, ¿no? Porque ya se sufre el efecto. Entonces, ¿qué tipo de economía puede tener ahí? Que eso es mucho más importante, ¿no? Para el tema de migración, que invertir en, no sé, que sea seguridad en la frontera de Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, ¿no? Eso moviliza a la gente que tiene una visión, por ejemplo, que está trabajando con migración, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que la conexión del tema de cambio climático y pensar un poco cómo incidir junto a los gobiernos, a las corporaciones y todo, que no hay tema que se escape de ahí, para mí ha sido uno de los gran motores de la movilización pública, ¿no? Y yo creo que tenemos en la región, una región que está acostumbrada a movilizarse más por otros temas que para ese, ¿no? Tenemos que saber que no hay movilización de la educación, al agua, a la pobreza, a la migración, que hoy no tenga que ver con cambio climático, y así yo creo que podemos movilizar mucho más las personas.
Muy bien, gracias, Pedro. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos los demás panelistas. Thank you so much for being part of this and giving your perspective. I hope to keep in contact. And then now I will turn the event back over to Adrian Arsht, Latin America Center Senior Director, Jason Marczak.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thanks again to all of our excellent moderators and panelists, as well as Diego Area and Willow Fortuneff and the Atlantic Council team for putting this event together. Now, Mayor Garcetti started off our conversation by highlighting the opportunities on how cities beginning in Los Angeles, and as Governor Lorraine highlighted, continuing to Santiago, are at the forefront, the front lines of advancing green and equitable growth. The rich, insightful discussions today offer bold new ideas for creating more equitable and sustainable economic growth through targeted investment funds, entrepreneurial networks, agricultural innovation, and advancements in renewable energy. These ideas offer leaders preparing for the summit tangible recommendations to consider in the months again. And we'd like to again thank the US State Department for its collaboration and all of our institutional partners and speakers who played such a fundamental role in preparing and now continuing today's discussion. We look forward to seeing you at the next Road to the Summit convening in early May, where we will unlock ideas on how to advance digitalization in the Americas. Until then, please stay safe and be well.